what will people be doing differently is the question that starts the mindset shift from outputs to outcomes.
Something I'm always trying to do in my role in organizations is make myself redundant from, the team don't need me anymore.
The sub theme here that we are dancing around but haven't yet named, right, is psychological safety. It's this feeling that I'm comfortable calling things out that are against the grain, that contradict the plan, that are not working, and I keep seeing and nobody's addressing. There's infinite stories of products like that people built that were amazingly executed that didn't meet a need, didn't solve a problem.
I can imagine people listening to this and getting some cold sweats going on at the concept of going to someone and saying, I did everything that you expected from me, but it wasn't good enough.
If you have a $1 million budget to build something, a new product or a new feature, a new service at work, and you spend 100 of that million and find out that this isn't the right thing to make. It's not a real problem. It's not, for whatever reason, right? You've just saved the company $900,000. They should hoist you up on their shoulders and sing your praises, parade you around the halls, right? Like that's how it should be.
Jeff, welcome. I'm Matt Lawrence for our audience. I'm COO at Easy Agile. And today I'm talking with Jeff Gothelf, who is the renowned author, speaker, and consultant. You've written a good few books, Jeff. I've been looking through the list, Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, Forever Employable, and co-authored a few. The latest one being Who Does What by How Much. And I was just telling Jeff in the intro here when we're getting to know each other a little bit, how you've managed to get across a lot of the things that I care about when trying to build teams and get them to understand OKRs. And I'm definitely going to be giving the book, I've already given it to a few people. I'm going to be giving it around to make sure that they understand the concepts that you've portrayed in it. So Jeff, welcome.
Thanks so much, Matt. And that's very kind of you on all of that stuff. So I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Well, I think we'll cover a little bit around the book and the concept you're trying to get across. So I suppose the first question I have is, what problem are you hoping to solve with the book? Why did you write it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I wrote a blog post about this a while back because somebody challenged me on LinkedIn, and I appreciate a good challenge. And so they said, "How can you write about all this stuff?" You mentioned I've written a few books. It's between Lean UX and Sense and Respond and the books that you've mentioned, it is quite a few books. And the challenge from this person on LinkedIn was, how can you write about all this stuff? How do you know? Like there's no way you know enough about each one of these topics to write a book, right? That you're spreading yourself way too thin. I thought that was a really interesting challenge. No one had ever kind of challenged me like that or asked that question. And it got me thinking. And the answer that I came up with, and it's in this blog post on my blog, is that this is the natural evolution, the book, Who Does What by How Much? And it's a conversation about customer-centric objectives and key results. It's the natural evolution of the work that I've been doing and that Josh Seiden and I have been doing together for more than 15 years. If you look at it, the way that I see it, at least, right, is we started with Lean UX. And Lean UX was a solution for designers, helping them work more effectively in agile software development environments. That was the purpose of that book. That was the problem that book was solving. That book is now in its third edition, and it's taken on a much broader scope about cross-functional collaboration, general risk mitigation, and just more customer centricity in product development. The response to that book was, "That's great, Jeff and Josh. We'd love to work this way. My company won't let me work this way." And so we wrote Sense and Respond. And Sense and Respond was a book for leaders and aspiring leaders to inspire them to manage differently, to recognize that the overwhelming majority of businesses today are software businesses, and that managing software-based businesses is different. And it requires a different approach to managing teams and team topologies and team structures and that type of thing, so that they would allow their teams to work in the ways that we described in Lean UX. And as we began to work with that material and talk about that, we kept bumping up against the same ceiling. And that ceiling was incentives and goals. No matter how hard we tried to convince people to be customer centric, to learn continuously, to improve continuously, to work in short cycles, they said, that's great, Jeff, but I get paid to ship features. Right? Right. That was it. Like the goal is the measure of success was shipped, preferably on time and on budget, but not required, right? Just get it out the door. That's what got celebrated and rewarded and incentivized and promoted, and it was in the job descriptions and all that stuff, right? And so it felt like we were really fighting a losing battle. And so our solution to solving these problems is books, right? And objectives and key results has been gaining momentum for the last decade or so. Certainly it's been around a lot longer than that, but since John Doerr's Measure What Matters, it really has picked up steam again. And to us, that felt like the perfect Trojan horse. And I know Trojan horse has a negative connotation. I don't think of it in this case as a negative thing. It was the perfect way to have a conversation about goals in a customer-centric fashion that, if applied in the way that we describe in the book, would enable everything else that we've done to happen more easily. So that's a long story to answer your question, but that's the problem that we set out to solve here, was to hopefully make it easier for people to do lean UX and product discovery and design thinking and lean startup and agile and all that stuff, right? Hopefully that's where we get to.
I love the evolution of that, Jeff. I've been working in tech now for about 15 years. Prior to that, as I was telling you before, I used to work in the arts, props, and special effects, which in itself is a very agile industry where you're constantly building your prototypes and figuring out, the jobs that the things need to do before they go on stage or be filmed. So when I entered into the tech world, I was as an inexperienced founder and product developer. I was designing to solve problems what I was doing, and I found that the teams I was working with responded really well to that. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to get here? And they used to give me feedback all the time on am I helping them see far enough ahead with the value we're actually trying to deliver and the things we're trying to achieve. I learned pretty quickly once I got that right, everything became a lot easier. When I joined Atlassian in 2014, when we were introducing OKRs there, I think we were facing a problem that you described really well in the book, which is around people focusing on shipping their to-do list. They have a backlog that is predefined. They've been working on it for a while. They're full of great ideas and they really want to get out the door. And as you say, they get rewarded for that. And trying to change the narrative, change that conversation to be around how do we know if this is any good? Like if we're getting this stuff out the door, how do we know it's actually helping anybody or making life better for people? And the answer was we just don't know.
Yeah.
I'd love to touch on how have you guided teams to move from that kind of more traditional output-based kind of metrics and shipping into that outcome approach? And maybe you could give an example of where that shift has led to some significant success.
Sure. So look, the title of the book, here's the book. It's always by my side, is who does what by how much. To your point, right? Overwhelmingly, the teams that we've worked on and with over the years have focused on delivering output, making stuff. And the question then was that we try to get them to understand is, well, if you do a great job, not if, let's do when. Yeah, let's be positive. When you do a great job with this feature, right? How will you know, right? What will people be doing differently is the question that starts the mindset shift from outputs to outcomes, right? Outcomes, the way that we describe them, is a meaningful change in human behavior that drives business results, right? That's the definition that we use for outcomes. So it's a meaningful change in human behavior. And the human that we're talking about is the human that consumes the thing that you create, right? And so the question then is, how will you know you delivered value to that human? And traditionally it's been like, well, we made the thing for them. There it is, right? We made the Sharpie for them. Terrific. Did anybody need a Sharpie? Anybody looking for a Sharpie? How do we know? Like, what are people doing now that the Sharpie's out there? Well, they're buying them and they're telling their friends and they're writing on Post-it notes and they're communicating more effectively. Okay, that's great, right? So the mindset shift starts with that question, right? Even in an organization that just doesn't get this yet, right? It's a really safe question. I think it's a safe question to say, okay, we're going to build the thing, right? And here's our estimate for building it and what it will look like and whatever, right? What do we expect people to be doing differently once we ship this thing? And when I say people, let's get specific about who, right? Right? Which people, who, right? This is kind of the evolution of the book title comes from the way that we teach this stuff. And that's exactly how the conversation starts. So what will people be doing differently? Before we start, which people, who, right? Okay, it's accountants in large accounting firms. Okay, great. So now that we're going to ship this new system to them, what are they going to be doing differently than they're doing today? Well, they'll be entering their data more successfully and finishing their work in half the time. They're finishing their work more quickly. Terrific. Cool. That's what they're doing, right? Who does what? And how much of that do we need to see to tell us that this was actually valuable? Right? Well, we want to see them like, today, what they're telling us is that they're seeing at least 30% error rate in data entry. Okay, great. What's meaningful? What's a meaningful improvement? Like if we cut that in half, that's a meaningful improvement. Okay, right? By how much? Right? So all of a sudden, we've constructed the success criteria that has moved the team away from we're building a thing to accountants in large accounting firms reduce their data entry errors by 50%, right? Who does what by how much? And so that begins, sorry, I got something in my eye. That begins the mindset shift in that conversation in a safe way, because we're not saying let's set new goals, right? Let's rewrite our incentives and performance management criteria. We're just saying, look, I'm just asking a question. And then I think once we start to build stuff, and especially once we start to ship stuff, you remember that conversation we had 3 months ago, right? We talked about who does what by how much. Is it happening, right? Do we know? Can we find out, right? And if it isn't, let's figure it out. Let's talk some more about that. So that's how the conversation starts, right? And I think that that's critical. There was an organization. So I'll give you an example. There was an organization I worked with. I really loved working with them. They were so resistant to outcome thinking. It was interesting because they're a nonprofit organization that was looking to reduce major diseases in the developing world, right? They had like 3 or 4 very specific diseases that they were targeting in very specific locations around the world. And I was thrilled to be working with them and to helping them with this
Wonderful
mission.
objective, yeah.
Which is super rare. Usually I'm like, oh, you want to build a better insurance product or a credit card? Okay, like I can, usually that's the work that I'm doing. But anyway, and they managed everything with a task list, right? A list of outputs. And they were like, well, we're going to create this campaign and we're going to put it on buses in China. And you're like, okay. How do you know that? Like, so what? Right? What will people be like if the campaign works? What will people be doing differently? Well, they'll scan the QR code that's on. Okay. All right. And then what? And then what? They'll sign up for an appointment to get to do a cardiovascular check. Okay. And then what? And then for those who need actual care, they'll sign up for care. Okay. Right. All of a sudden, right, we've put an ad campaign on a bus to who does what by how much. And when we started to think about it that way, they fundamentally were rethinking the level of effort, number one, that they were putting into every campaign.
That's
Because as you
helpful.
might imagine, it was whole. Like the level of effort was 100% for every campaign. We're going to do the whole thing and print 1 million copies of this thing and stick it on 1 million buses and hope that it works. Instead, hey, we're going to do 100 of these, right? In one municipality, locality, whatever it is, right? And we're going to give it a week. And we're going to not only see what happens, but we're going to, we have folks on the ground, we're going to have them sort of ask if people saw the ad and if it speaks to them, if they understood what it said, that type of thing. And then based on that learning, we're going to iterate on the campaign, right? So instead of getting one giant shot at this advertising campaign to drive people to take better care of themselves, now they're going to get 10, right? And I think that was massively impactful in helping that organization do better work and help more people. Right? So I think
I love how I love how you're bringing that back to the experimental and iterative approach that people so often want, but really struggle to get to. Yeah, I think I've seen so many occasions where OKRs end up describing something that takes, 3, 4, 5 months to build and ship, and they're only trying to measure the big outcome at the end, whereas what you're talking about there is breaking it down and making it far more iterative and experimental.
and reducing your risk, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine they had like imagine this organization had, let's say they had $100,000 for this campaign. Traditionally, they would spend that whole 100 grand and hope. And the reality is that there's no need to do that. They could spend 10 and learn and do a better job with the next 10 and a better job with the next 10 and a better job with the next 10. And if they've de-risked it enough, take the last 50 and dump it on the thing that you've actually validated, right? But it's a de-risking strategy as well. You're increasing the value you're delivering and reducing the risk of spending money on stuff that isn't going to work. Feels like a
I love
no-brainer. Doesn't it feel like a no-brainer?
You make it sound like everyone should be doing it, which I agree with. There was something that you did in the middle of that conversation, which I really liked, and it's kind of like the opposite of the 5 whys, where you see the problem, why is that a problem, why, and you go back to the beginning around the root cause. Whereas you took that in the other direction there. It's like you want to put this thing on a bus.
Yeah.
So what? So what are you
Yeah.
doing with that? And you took that 3 or 4 steps forwards to get to that ultimate outcome at
Right,
the
right.
end.
Instead of looking for that, we were moving forward in time for the desired outcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's probably a tactical approach. What practical approach that our audience can take? I think some of the stuff that I've struggled with over the years is getting teams who are new to OKRs to understand how to move from, writing their to-do list, writing their backlog, turning that into their key results, and actually getting it into the outcome base. And I think that's an approach that's sometimes work, not always.
Yeah.
I still think that's one of the things that a lot of teams find hardest to grasp. And as you kicked off with, if your entire career you've been rewarded for shipping and producing and ticking off a to-do list, then it's really hard to break away from that without some form of leadership buy-in.
Yeah. And that's kind of coming back to that incentives and performance management criteria side of things. That's really hard, right? Because that's what people optimize for, right? So we can preach outcome-based work until we're blue in the face, as they say in America,
Yeah.
at least. But if people are getting paid to ship product, they're going to optimize in most cases for what gets them paid. And so it's an important component of this that I think gets ignored a lot.
So let's talk practically around there's probably we're gonna have different people listening to this. If we could probably give 2 bits of advice, one to somebody who's in a team and they really want to try this, or maybe they've been trying this and struggling because the incentives don't match that they're trying to go for an outcome-based approach.
Yeah.
The other group may be someone who's in leadership who is trying to change their organization to move into this more outcome-based approach. What advice would you give to each of those people?
Yeah, great question. So let's start with the folks trying to make this happen initially. So the best, well, the in my opinion, one of the easiest ways to move this conversation forward in your organization is to ask that question that I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is, what will people be doing differently when we ship this? Right? Have that conversation, position that any way you like, word it any way you like, but ultimately, right, you're not challenging the work. You're not saying I'm not going to do the work. You're not pushing back yet against any of that, right? All you're saying is, look, yeah, we're going to build this thing and we're going to do a great job. What do we hope people will do with this once we have it out there? What are we trying to see? Are we trying to see them, increase average order value? We want them to abandon their shopping carts less frequently. Are we trying to get them to sign up for a medical checkup more, at least once a year? Right? What is it that we're trying to get them to do? And I think that starts it, right? That starts getting people to think about more than just I am making a thing, right?
Because if you
Um,
took that to leadership, if you were in a team and you're measured for shipping stuff, if you went back to leadership and said, I know, yeah, we're going to get this stuff out the door, but I want to check with you that you're happy that this is the outcome we're trying to get to, that this is the result if we get it right.
I think that's great. And I think that you should come back to them after you ship and say, look, remember we met 3, 6, 9 months ago and I said, we're building this and we're hoping people will do this. Well, we built it as designed, on time, on budget, right? And so far, we're not seeing the results that we anticipated, right? Um, and we talked to some customers, and here's why we think that is, and here's what we'd like to do next. Like to me, that should be a safe conversation inside your organization. That's
I
what I
can imagine people listening to this and getting some cold sweats going on at the concept of going to someone and saying, I did everything that you expected from me, but it wasn't good enough.
Well, it's not that. It's we built, what tends to happen in these situations is a lot of upfront planning and commitments, and then we execute, right? Regardless of all of the work that people have done, like you and me and others, to convince people that there are better ways of working. Right? That's generally speaking how people are doing work still. Um, we did the thing, and guess what? It didn't work, right? It didn't work as we had hoped, right? And it's not because we built it poorly, right? It works as designed. We did usability testing on it. People can use it. They can get through the workflow, right? What we think is it's not solving a meaningful problem, or it's, we decided to put it somewhere in the workflow that didn't make sense, or whatever the case is. I understand, right? But it's look, I'm not saying it's not a risky conversation, right? I'm not encouraging people listening to do things that are career limiting, per se, right? But at some point, we've got to talk about this kind of stuff. Otherwise, we're just a factory, right? I don't think
Couldn't
anybody
agree
wants to
more.
work in a factory.
I couldn't agree more. And I think at the heart of what I spend a lot of my time doing is helping people understand how to get the benefits out of being agile, that agility piece. And what we've been discussing there is that key part of learning. You can plan and you can build, you can have alignment on those things. You can improve how you're building all the time and reach those quality standards and do the usability testing.
Yeah,
But ultimately, if you don't learn, you're never going to get the insight that you need to adapt what you do next. And I do think that's where a lot of people fall down with agility. They go through all of the motions up to that point, and then through fear, self-preservation, or they've just not seen anybody else around them do it before them. They hesitate to say this thing that we've all invested all this time and effort into isn't working as expected. It
yeah,
does take some courage to do that.
it does. It does. I agree, but it's, yes, and it's an evidence-based conversation, right? It's not, um, well, we did a crap job, right? We didn't, right? It's bug
And you can
free.
demonstrate that. You've
Yeah,
got the metrics to prove it. Yeah.
yeah. It's bug free. It's high performance. It's scalable. It's secure. It's usable, right? I mean, but like you can build like I mean, there's infinite stories of products like that people built that were amazingly executed that didn't meet a need, didn't solve a problem, just
Yeah, I built
didn't
one
work
of
out.
those and had to close a business for it, so I know that all too well. Yeah. And it's if there's a lesson I learned through the years of doing that, and you touched on it earlier on around um, by focusing on the outcomes that you want to see, those behaviors you want to change, and bringing the work, de-scoping the work down to start to, experiment and iterate, and you de-risk all of that.
Yeah,
Clearly, you'll learn a lot earlier whether you're on the right track or not, rather than getting that big bang at the end.
Yeah, and again, you're reducing the risk of building something that people don't want. So let's again let's just because round numbers are easy. If you have a $1 million budget to build something, a new product or a new feature, a new service at work, and you spend 100 of that million and find out that this isn't the right thing to make. It's not a real problem. It's not, there's what for whatever reason, right? You've just saved the company $900,000. They should hoist you up on their shoulders and sing your praises, parade you around the halls, right? Like that's
Absolutely.
how it should be, right? That's because you're a hero. You're a hero. And now we can take that 900 grand and do something that actually will deliver value with it.
I completely agree. Now there was an unanswered question earlier,
Oh yeah.
that was my fault for throwing two at you at once. So apologies for that. But the second half of that question was around if you were a senior leader in an organization, um, and you want to move to an outcome-based approach, maybe you start with celebrating the people who are trying to do that and positively enforcing it in that way. But what advice would you give that person?
Yeah. So absolutely celebrating anybody, like really and by celebrating, I mean hoisting them up on your shoulders and parading them around the halls, literally, right? And saying, look, this team tried this, figured out it wasn't going to work, and pivoted, right? And saved the company $1 million. That should be a regular conversation and a regular thing that the company celebrates. Number one. Number two, I think if you've got, what's interesting is that you can find yourself on a team with resistant leadership. And you can also find yourself in leadership with resistant teams. And for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that they've never actually been allowed to work this way and don't believe you that you're going to let them work this way, right? And so, again, without getting caught up in too much process or training or dogma or religion, right? I think as a leader, you start to kind of soften the conversations around this stuff by instead of asking like changing the questions that you ask, right? So normally it's like, hey, what are you guys working on? When will it be ready? How much it's going to cost me? What do you predict the ROI is going to be on that, right? That's a typical line of questioning for a product team. I think conversely, you can say, hey, folks, what are you learning this week or this sprint, or this quarter? What did you learn this quarter, right? You might get a bunch of blank stares initially, right? And they say, what do you mean? What did we learn? Well, we're building the right thing, right? Is there a real need for this thing that we've decided to make? Well, I don't know. You told us to build it. Okay. Well, cool. Next quarter when we meet, right? I'd love for you folks I'm going to ask you this question again, basically. Like, what did you learn this quarter about the product, about the customer, about the value of the thing that we're delivering, right? And if you don't know how to answer those questions, I can help, right? I can get training for you. I can, get some folks who've done this in the other parts of the company to show you how they're doing this work. But to me, you're not enforcing. I think one of the issues, and we talked about this in the but prior to hitting record a bit. One of the issues of organizations just sort of like mass, mashing process on top of organizations, like name your process of choice there is I think folks don't understand why, right? Why we're doing that. Like, why are we doing this? Um, and how is this supposed to make anything better? And so I think that one of the ways to ease folks into a different way of working is to change your expectations of them and to make that clear to them. So instead of saying, what are you building? When will it be ready? What's the ROI? It's, hey, what are you learning? Are we doing the right thing? Right? How will we know? And then if they don't know how to get the answers to that, you don't make them feel stupid, right? Say, look, I'm going to help you with that. Right? Like I'll show you how the other teams are doing it. I'll get you some training. We'll work on this, whatever, that type of thing. But to me, that's super powerful, right? Because you're changing the expectations that you have for your team and you're making it explicit to them.
I love that. Um, I'm I've got this image in my head of um, people in a large organization where they're on this journey that you've described with their team. So maybe they're in a leader somewhere in the middle of the organization, and they're working with multiple teams on this, and they're starting to see some progress. They're getting the teams are on board. They actually trust that the questions you're asking are genuine, they're authentic, and you really want to understand the outcomes you're getting to. And they're starting to come back with great questions themselves around, who does what? What's the behavior we're trying to change? How are we trying to change it? Are we successfully doing that or not? Whilst that starts to get some traction and get some momentum, at the same time, this leader's got other people in the organization, maybe some more traditional executives who are getting investors on their boards, asking for their KPIs to be met and the efficiency and the predictability that they expect so that they can forecast. They have jobs to do themselves, and they will seek some predictability. How do you help? How do you guide that person to navigate those two conflicting forces?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and I've seen it multiple times. I think there are there's a couple of ways, right? I think to navigate those sort of political challenges in an organization. I think one is you have to model the behavior that you want to see both in your teams and in your colleagues as well, right? So I think every interaction that you have with your peers in a leadership level should contain these types of conversations around the customer, around learning, around value, around risk mitigation, and continuing to sort of model the behavior you want to see in folks. It's like, well, we have to build the iPhone app. Okay, great, but like, why? Why do we have to build the iPhone app? Right? Because we have to increase um, mobile revenue. Okay, why? Right? What is it today? What are we hoping to get? Right? Um, there's a super simple trick. I wrote about this probably a decade ago. There's a super simple trick if you're in a leadership position to get the organization to start to think differently about how to do work. And it's simply changing the names of the teams, right? So for example, let's say you and I work on the iPhone team, the iPhone app team, right? What's our mission?
When
Build
you
the iPhone.
describe it like that, it would be to build an iPhone app. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's the iPhone app team, and that's the CRM team, and that's the whatever team, right? That's the Android app team, whatever. What if we changed the name of that team, right? Same people, right? But it's the mobile revenue team, right? Something like that, right? All of a sudden, right? The purpose of the team has fundamentally changed. It's no longer build iPhone app, right? It's increase revenue through the mobile channel, right? Or the mobile experience team, right? It's improve the mobile experience. That might be an iPhone app, might be an Android app, might be a better website, it might be a million different things, right? But the from a leadership perspective, one of the things that you can influence is the name of these teams, and how you name them determines what work they do, right? And I think that that's really powerful as well. The other thing that you can do as a leader is so you're going to model the behavior that you want to see. You might be able to change the name of the teams. That's helpful. And prove the model, right? So, you know, there's a lot of like, well, my idea is better than your idea type of conversations at work. Prove it, right? So instead of saying, look, I think we should work this way, say, look, I've got a pilot team in my group that's been doing this for the last 3 months. Here's what the team looks like. Here's the work that they're doing. Here's how they work. Here's what they're producing. Here's their happiness score. Here's their productivity. Here's their efficiency. Here's the impact of the work that they're doing with the customer. And if you've got one or two of those teams working that way, that's a compelling argument for saying, look, let's give it a shot. Right? I've got the evidence that says that this is a better way of working. So I think those are all a variety of ways that leaders can try to get this to move forward, especially if they're not sort of the leader and can just say, look, we're gonna try this, right? Proving the model is always a good way to go.
And I've got echoes of the past where teams themselves have changed their name, and sometimes to a bit of an obscure thing, but when they find that sweet spot, it's like some popular culture reference, which is entertaining at the time and then gets really confusing, down the track. But when they get it right, I've seen that work. I haven't thought about that in a really long time, so that's a good call out.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm picking up on what you're saying leads to an outcome within teams that I've seen that maybe we could go there next, which is around autonomy and empowerment within teams. And
Yeah.
something I'm always trying to do in my role in organizations is make myself redundant from, the team don't need me anymore. And I've
Yeah.
got it at the moment at work where I've been very clear with the rest of the leadership team. I'm getting involved in way too many decisions.
Yeah.
And I need to remove myself from those decisions because I'm slowing us down. If I have to have all of the context to be able to get involved with that and help move us forwards, then we're going to go slower than we should.
Yeah.
So we're very quickly removing me from decisions, and it's been a great journey. Terrifying for me because don't know as much about what's going on, but I'm seeing the teams who themselves are equipped with questions like who does what by how much. That's one tool around the OKRs. They're also equipped with other tools and ways of working. And usually it comes down to, are they asking the right question? Are they applying the level of critical thinking to achieve those outcomes? But ultimately, if we can get teams to be more autonomous, leaders have a much better time of scaling themselves without burnout, without having to get really, drawn in. When teams make decisions when you're not in the room that are fighting to achieve the outcome that you also want to achieve, that's when you really start to move quickly. That's when you start to really see the benefits of agility. Have you got any thoughts on that you'd like to share?
It's a really tough sell, and I see it all the time because I think that leaders have defined themselves, and I don't like to speak in absolutes. So the majority of leaders have defined themselves in a way that says, I tell people what to do, right? That's my job. You grow, like if you ask any kid, right? Ask any kid. I don't know what a kid is, like 10 years old, 12 years old, 9 years old, right? What's a boss? They'd be like, oh, a boss is someone who tells somebody else what to do. Right. I think we grow up with that. And I think leadership canon, for the last 100 years has roughly said that with the exception of the last 20 to 30 years, where we've seen a lot of sort of these agility themed leadership books and materials come out. But still, I think the overwhelming majority of people believe that it's their job when they're in a leadership role to tell their teams what to do and to be keenly aware of every little detail. Because what if my boss comes to me and says, hey, what are your teams doing? Right? Like if the answer is, I don't know, right? That's probably a bad answer, right? And so I agree with you. I agree that like day-to-day decision stuff, right? Who better to make that decision than the teams doing the work day to day?
They know far more about it than I
Yeah.
do, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. They're with the work every day. They're with the customer every day. They're getting the feedback. There's no reason for you to run these tiny things past the leader every day. It's exhausting for the leader, as you said, right? And you know more about it. Big strategic shifts, invalidated hypotheses, radical shifts in the market, right? New competitive threats. Absolutely. Right. Let's talk about that. And so I think this is a two-way, there's a two-way solution here. Number one, leaders need to let go a little bit and understand that the most qualified people to make uh, to make decisions about the day-to-day trivial stuff is the team doing the work, right? It's what David Marquette said and turned the ship around, right? He said he ran this. He turned around the worst performing nuclear submarine crew in the American Navy to the best performing nuclear submarine crew in the American Navy. And basically, what he said was like he pushed decision making down as close to the work as possible. He goes, the only decision he kept for himself was whether or not to launch a nuclear missile, right? He's like, because people are going to die, and I don't want that on anybody. That's my job as the leader. right? Same thing here. You're going to push decisions all the way down. And we've got to get folks to think about that. I think to make that easier for people to swallow, people who are not used to this way of working, I think we have to demand greater proactive transparency from the teams, right? So teams love to play the victim, right? Right? They don't let me work this way. My boss won't let me work this way. Oh, my boss, he doesn't get agility. He doesn't get customer centricity, right? She just comes down here and yells at us, whatever. Um, what if, what if on a weekly basis, without being asked for it, you sent your leader 3 bullet points in an email every week, right? Here's what we did this week. Here's what we learned. Here's what we're planning on doing next week, right? And if there's anything significant, right, you're going to put that in there as well. But otherwise, here's what we did this week, right? The decisions that we made, the things we shipped, whatever it is, right? Here's what we learned in the process. This is a good idea, a bad idea, whatever. And here's what we're planning on doing next week. That's it. You're not even asking for a response, right? Weekly update, 3 bullet points, 15-minute max of effort on your part. Right? What if you did that? In my opinion, and in my experience, to be perfectly honest, what happens is leaders chill out, right? Because all of a sudden they know what's going on, right? They see A, that you're doing work, B, that you're making objective decisions, and C, that you're taking the time to keep them informed so that when their boss comes to them and says, hey, what are your teams doing? They can just look at that email and be like, this is what team A is doing, Matt's team, Jeff's team, whatever, the iPhone team, whatever, right? This is what they're doing, right? And to me, if there's a role here, and it's not insignificant for the teams to play to improve their ways of working, or to improve uh, the comfort level that leaders have with new ways of working.
I have had the privilege of being someone on the recipient of the equivalent of those 3 bullet point
Yeah.
emails, for running 12 different product teams, trying to understand what was going on. And you're right, the stress levels go down when you understand proactively what's going on.
Yeah.
And it became the first thing I would do on a Monday morning, knowing I had all that information. And like I say, it was something the teams were doing as part of their own kind of weekly reviews as a team, and they just captured it and shared it. So there was no extra work for them. But it made this huge difference of suddenly I could understand, where did I need to actually spend my time to help, rather than trying to chase and get, information, or get too close into managing people or supporting people who didn't need it because they had it in hand. I was able to prioritize and go, well, it looks like they're struggling, so we're going to go and ask them some questions, see how I
Yeah.
can support them and remove some blockers for them or their dependencies.
Yeah, and if there is a blocker, sure, add it in there, right? We've been trying for 3 months to get access to customers. The sales team keeps blocking us. Could really use your help here. Right?
There's a thing that I've seen. We've touched on psychological safety and the fear of sharing when things aren't working, and we then touched just then on um, the fear of not knowing or not having the answers. There's a thing I've observed over the years, and there's this tipping point in your career, and a lot, it takes a while to get there before you actually start getting rewarded for it in most organizations. In forward thinking, very agile organizations, it starts a lot earlier, and I think that's something I'd like to, I have a bit of a mission to try and shift left, try and get it earlier in people's careers. And it's this shift between, you spend your entire career being rewarded for being knowledgeable, for being
Mm.
the expert, for knowing how to do something, and you get promoted for that. You'll get a bonus for that. You'll get rewarded for it time after time. The more you learn, the more capable you become, the more experienced you are. You've got the answers for everything. You get promoted. You work your way up the career ladder. And then you hit this tipping point where you hit a level where you realize there aren't many people around you at that point who are seeing the problems. Everyone's busy, everyone's focused on their thing. And then you realize that actually it's your job to call out that this thing isn't working.
Yeah.
It becomes your responsibility to say, there's a problem here that we're not addressing as a company, as an organization. Um, as an exec, I think Nick and I, Nick's our CEO, we have an exec weekly, and the majority of that conversation is each of us saying what we don't understand, what we don't know, what we haven't figured out yet. We trust each other, all the rest of it's in hand and working beautifully. But the things we really want to talk about is what don't we understand, and what are we learning, or what are we seeing that we need to try and figure out what to do with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I see people struggle with that transition if they've not started it earlier in their career. And going back to the basics are around sharing the learnings. Are we actually achieving what we wanted to? Are we seeing the behavior shift? Are we seeing it measure? If we're saying no, having the freedom to be able to call that out earlier, I think it makes that transition in your career a lot more straightforward.
Look, there's a level of seniority I think that allows you to do that. That again, we keep coming back, and the sub theme here that we are dancing around but haven't yet named, right, is psychological safety, right? It's this feeling that I'm comfortable calling things out that are against the grain, that contradict the plan, that are not working, and I keep seeing and nobody's addressing. And I think look, I think there's a level of seniority that brings some psychological safety, but ultimately organizational culture has to make it safe, right? In other words, like if leaders like you and your leadership team are, you know, consistently curious, what don't we know? What are we not aware of? What's not working? Your teams are going to feel comfortable calling those things out to you because you're asking those questions, right? What don't we know? Well, you should know, right, that this team over here has been really kicking ass lately, and this is how they're doing it, right? Wow. Okay, cool. What are they doing differently? How do we scale that? Whatever, right? I think that, and again, it comes back. You asked me earlier, like, what should leaders do, right? Leaders change the questions that they ask. And I think when they change the questions that they ask, it models psychological safety. It models the kinds of questions they want their teams to ask. And that's how change starts, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more, Jeff. Um, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and psychological safety is one of those really hard, intangible things for some people, particularly if they've never experienced it. And you see, we see when we get new people join our team, where we're again privileged environment, we have a lot of psychological safety. When new people join in, they come from a environment that hasn't had that, their behavior is kind of almost fighting against the trust, and they kind of hold on to their protected ways of working, where they get a little bit territorial, and they don't want to be vulnerable, and it can take a good few months for people to settle in and relax into it. um, I think there was a piece that I want to go back to, and maybe we wrap up on this, is that you talked earlier around a leader talking to their team and asking them questions to help them understand that it's okay to come back and say, this thing that we've been developing, this product that we've been getting out the door, isn't having the desired impact, or it is,
Yeah.
but actually look at it, question it, be curious, and come back to it. And the thing that you touched on there, which I really love, was um, that supportive nature of it, that it's okay to do this. And if you don't know how to do it, I'll help you. How, probably, if you were to give one last tip to us, how would you encourage people to kind of move more into that space?
Leaders specifically,
Leaders specifically.
I think, again, I think it's a question of asking the right questions. I've been married a long time. Half my life, it turns out. I did the math the other day. Um, and if I've learned nothing in my 20 plus years of being married, um, I've learned that you don't start out immediately solving the problem. You listen and you ask questions, right? That's I've learned that. It took a long time, right? And I think that that's our nature as leaders as well. I think in when we're in a leadership position, the tendency is, well, let me solve that for you, right? Well, hang on, right? Before you jump to solutions, right? Dig into the problem. What's the issue here? How can I best help you? Well, listen, we've done that. We've set these customer-centric goals. Now we've got great OKRs. Thanks for teaching us how to do that. Um, Normally, though, we're told what to do, and no one's telling us what to do now, and we don't know what to do. We have no idea how to figure that out. Like in the past, people have told us, right? Now I don't know what to do. Okay, can you help us? How do we figure that out? Right? To me, that's the kind of uh, answer. Those are the kinds of answers you want to elicit from your teams, right? Is what's actually going on here, right? Well, it's like you keep, we keep hearing that we should be talking to customers. The reality is it's really difficult to get to our customers. What? Why is it difficult? This is where five whys comes in, right? Why is it difficult? Well, because we're in a B2B space and we sell, you know, airplane engines. Okay, great. And why is that difficult to reach customers, right? Well, because we have a sales team. Well, why does that make it difficult? Well, because they guard their contacts and they don't want us messing with it. Well, okay, now I understand, right? So I think if it's about asking the right questions as a leader, and then, right, when you get to the root cause, then you can say, well, listen, I can try to unblock it in this way. Do you think that would be helpful? Yes or no, right? And I think that's a great place to start rather than just saying, okay, here's a solution. I've solved right away, right? And I think that works in the majority of situations.
And I think in doing so, it becomes far more of a partnership than a hierarchical kind of relationship then.
Yeah. Yeah, I trust you to tell you what I need, and then you trust me to be honest with you about how well things are working and where things need help. And that's tremendous, right? Like I run a very, very tiny business in a sense of like number of people, right? It's 3.5 people total, right? And then even in a 3.5 person business, right? People try to do good work and people don't want to bother you with what's going on. And but it turns out that like sometimes people get overwhelmed, right? Whether it's with work or personal stuff or a combination of the two, right? And then things start to slip. And so the more you can foster that kind of transparency and trust, psychological safety, um, the less you find out that something is broken with the consequences of it being broken. You know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, like you find out well in advance of any consequences actually happening.
I love that. Jeff, I think that's a great place to wrap up. I'm really grateful for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.